Most of my viewers are American, and I can understand that you might feel hopeless about the prospect of your futures. But whatever comes to pass in the next few years, remember that there's one character you should never follow in the steps of: Barrett from Final Fantasy VII. Barrett is a man born from desperation and frustration. He agrees to allow Shinra to build a Mako reactor in Corel because he has no choice. Without it, his wife is going to pass on. When he's betrayed, the whole town blames him for allowing Shinra to build on their land. Barrett never had a choice in the matter. He was completely trapped and only had one realistic option: to swallow his pride, which is what an honest person should do if the situation calls for it. He felt trapped by the system and was forced to play its game like all of us. But when he was cheated, he decided he was going to flip the table and burn the house down. For all of Barrett's noble appearance, his plan for stopping Shinra is suicidal. Blowing up the reactors doesn't solve anything. Sure, you've stopped the planet from being drained of its life force, but you've still crippled and ultimately destroyed humanity. The world of Final Fantasy VII depends on Mako and materia. It's used in nearly every industry to make it function. We can draw a direct parallel to fossil fuels in our world. We've become dependent on them. Without oil, every industry in the world would collapse without the means of transportation, such as ships and aeroplanes. Of course, the problem is that we're killing the planet by mining this stuff, and we're eventually going to run out, which is why we need a solution. There are lots of brilliant minds working on that problem. Both us and Shinra need to find an alternative to fuel and Mako, and we've made great strides in creating alternative energy and fuel sources. And Barrett has an answer to the problem, but he doesn't have a solution. If the planet needs Mako to survive, and Shinra is taking the Mako, then stopping Shinra is an answer, but it doesn't solve the problem. Society can't just regress to a less technological time. That would be reversing evolution, and only species doomed to fail want to go back in time. So by blowing up reactors, Barrett isn't solving any problems, because there's no alternative to Mako, hence Shinra has no choice but to rebuild the reactors. All Barrett is doing is murdering innocent people and costing the taxpayer millions of dollars to repair the reactors. While the game frames Avalanche as terrorists in the people's eyes as a way of villainizing them, that's really what they are: terrorists. They're causing mass destruction and murder in the name of a radical and ill-thought-out ideology that they use to further their own beliefs. Avalanche is essentially just the Stop Oil protesters destroying essential monuments. You can't just stop oil, you need to replace it with something or the world as we know it falls apart. And you know what? I think Barrett knows this. He's not an idiot. He knows that this isn't a permanent solution, and after seeing his origin story in Corel, I'm not sure how much Barrett truly cares about the planet, at least during the initial Midgar section. Something tells me that murdering all these Shinra employees is more of a violent revenge for what Shinra put him through, and for the murder of Dyne. Barrett seems like someone who was radicalized by a vicious government that walked right over him, and he refused to take that lying down. What kind of man gets a minigun as a prosthetic? Someone who wants to hurt as many people as possible, someone who wants to inflict massive damage on his enemies, and someone who isn't interested in saving anything. I believe Barrett puts on that front of being a savior only because he has to care for Marlene. He couldn't let his best friend's daughter see him as the violent terrorist he wanted to be, so he put on the guise of a freedom fighter so they could both sleep at night. I understand how he feels. The more we look at the news around the world, the more hopeless we feel. We're getting crushed more and more by the system, and pretty soon there's going to be nothing left. But you don't need me to tell you that blowing up buildings isn't the answer. It's okay to be furious with modern society, but don't turn that rage into violence. Let it all out if you have to. Make your voice heard, not your fists. And guess what? We're nowhere near as bad off as the world of Final Fantasy VII. After all, we've still got democracy and the ability to vote for change. They say actions speak louder than words, and they are correct, but that doesn't mean you can't be too noisy. Look at those Just Stop Oil guys. They've gone so far that I genuinely can't tell if there's a psyop to try and make the protests look bad. If they are sincere, then it's because they went so overboard that I have trouble believing them. But is Barrett still a good person? Although he ultimately wants to save the planet, the way he goes about it is at best selfish, and at the worst completely deranged. I'll be back in 2 days. In the meantime, here's a video about why Final Fantasy VII Rebirth oddly keeps trying to pair up Barrett and Red 13.